Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this rather interesting night of. I mean, they don't know what they're going to do, so I don't know how we know. So it's going to be brilliant. So I'm really looking forward to this. Welcome to the stage, Jakko and Robin.
Hello, everyone. This is. I'll tell you just one little tiny thing about my book about ADHD that sums this up. I thought that we had two halves to this and we'd kind of set out exactly that, but we got here and we told no, it's just like 40 minutes and then questions. So I prepared for the wrong show, and I'm not going to tell you any more. But basically, that sums up the ADHD mind. Jakko, you and me have done the longest period of rehearsal ever today. I think it was about 23 to 24 minutes.
Yeah.
And. Yeah, so should we start off with, we're going to kind of bounce back and forth between some bits from this poetry book that I've just put together, and also talk about Jakko's fantastic memoir. It is a memoir. I think once you've written your if you're under 50, it's an autobiography. If you're 54 like you, then it's a memoir, isn't it?
That got a much bigger laugh than I was
hoping. Yeah. So this is the first, kind of one of the first. It's the first poem in this book, and it's a poem which I wrote the day after I got diagnosed, and I didn't realise that in any way it was about that. I wrote it on Wembley Central Station platform, and then I performed it that night at the Beautiful Days Festival. I was like really worried. I was thinking, 'cause I don't normally perform poetry, and I thought, I don't know if that worked or not. And then a physicist about my age came up to me, and she was in tears, and she went, I know what this poem's really about, which is one of the things which I love funny, and we'll talk about that with also your songs as well and your work.
Which poem will we do?
We're going to do the one last night about the stars. You have got the right glasses on, haven't you?
And we rehearsed that this afternoon, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. But unfortunately, it was the. It's going to be a little bit like watching Memento. This, trying to actually put it all together. Whatever comes out, Jakko, we'll all pretend that was what was rehearsed. It doesn't matter if it's not what is rehearsed. Okay. I mean, if it ends up sounding like when I'm cleaning windows, it'll just change the kind of. The words will mean the same thing, but they'll have a more upbeat gist. Last night, a ghost collided with my head. It was the light from something dead. Once it had breathed hydrogen into helium, created a beacon, projected its life across the stars. And yet, somehow, as it projected its life, that ghost that hit me in the eye, that strangeness of it all, because there was nothing it was like to be that star. Only something it was like to marvel at that star, because the stars cannot wonder about the stars. And Jupiter too is without curiosity. Me, I'm small, and I'm fragile, and I'm easily felled by meteorites or by microbes. But I'm pugnacious, inquiring, tenacious. I can chew on the quandaries of the cosmos. I've got a skull full of pictures and questions and problems too. I don't like my anxiety. But then I realise it's also my fire, because much that destroys me also creates me. There is something it is like to be me, and it's not always satisfactory. My atoms battle, my molecules revolt, but still, more than the single line of an equation or a solo chemical reaction, confused, confusing, absurd, but flashes of inspiration. And out of my ashes may grow apples. Emergent complexity briefly defeats the void. Thank you, Jakko. That's and this is something that I'm very proud of. One of the first times I performed this was in New Haven, and afterwards this man came up to me and said, "What was the last line again?" He said, "I'm not sure I heard it exactly right." And I told him, and then a month later he sent me this, and it's a photo of his lower arm, which has that final line tattooed on him now. So I can almost give up poetry immediately. Have you had that? You must have had that with some of your work, where someone's come up and they've had, you know, that kind of, because there's such a strength of love in the prog world. And so has anyone ever revealed a strange tattoo or branding?
No, thankfully.
That's a great pity, because but this is the thing that we were in the pub the other day, and you had two teenagers come up to you.
Yeah.
And they were 18 years old probably, and they were like, "Oh my God, are you Jakko Jakszyk?" And you did have that kind of look about,
well, exactly. Yeah.
Are these friends of my son or something like that? But King Crimson has quite an interesting, you know, the change of the cast as such, and then the change of the audience.
I think it's down to it's the democratization of the internet. I think there's kind of less tribalism in terms of music, so everything is open to them. And I guess it's happened a few times where I'm always shocked, because I'm used to a core audience of overweight, bald, fat blokes, and so to see somebody of that age.
Yeah. There's not as many.
Lovely to see you again.
There should be more here. Apparently Marillion are playing up the road, but otherwise they.
So and he said that I guess some of the bands he's following quote Crimson as an influence. So then they go looking for Crimson, and because the version I'm in has had more views, and again there's a version of a song called Starless, which is a very long song in Japan, and it's had 15 million views, and so in their heads. So when they go back to the old stuff, they think, "Oh no, it doesn't sound like it ought to." So suddenly I've become this the bloke, which is really weird, because clearly I was such a fan of Crimson when I was a kid.
But you have, because I find that very interesting now, which is for a lot of younger people, they don't find music as many of us did. So it doesn't matter when it came out.
No,
whereas
absolutely.
I think for a lot of stuff, it used to be, what's in the charts today. Yeah. But you also, when you were growing up, when you were very young, you kind of fell in love with prog, while most of your friends were not into that at all.
Well, especially the more extreme sorts. A band like Henry Cow, who I fell in love with deeply. In the end, even as a teenager, I had to go and see them on my own, because after a while at school they went, if he asks you to go and see Henry Cow, it's absolute rubbish, it's not even proper music. Because there was a whole kind of free jazz aspect to some of it. But we were in a generation where I wouldn't have liked the music my dad liked, even if I'd liked it. It had a, do you know what I mean? It had a kind of stamp of this is ours, and that seems to have all gone. My son we used to do this thing in the car where we would play tunes to each other, and some days he'd play me, he'd play me something that just came out the week before, but then he'd play this other thing, and as it started, I'd think, this sounds like it was recorded in the 50s or 60s. And he said, "Yeah, it's a bloke called Wes Montgomery. Have you heard of him?" I went, "Well, yeah, of course I've heard of Wes Montgomery." But to him, it's all just music,
So there's a beautiful story about what happened with Henry Cow. So you used to go and watch them a lot at St Albans, didn't you, when you were...
Well, I watched them everywhere, yeah.
13, 14?
I was about 13 or 14, yeah. You want me to tell that story?
Yeah, I love that. It's just a beautiful story, because this is the great thing about Jakko's career, which is the number of times that things that you adored, you then become part of, and you become involved with the people you produced.
It started as me being this solitary 13-year-old in the audience, And after a while, the band would think, oh, it's that kid again. And they started waving to me. And I thought, oh, man, this is my favourite band. And they're waving to me. And then I went to see them in St Albans, and I missed my last bus home. And I thought, I have no idea how I'm going to get back to Croxley Green, which is where I was living. And I was walking down the street, and then this van pulled over. And a guy got out, and I was a bit worried at first. I thought, who the fuck's this? And it turned out it was Chris Cutler, the drummer from Henry Cow. And he said, are you all right? And I went, well, I've missed my last bus home. And he went, hang on a sec. He went back in and he said, we'll give you a lift. I went, what, all the way back to Croxley Green? He said, yeah, only we're going to go and eat first. So they took me, the first curry I ever had was with my favourite band. So they took me for an Indian meal, and then they drove me all the way home. And then when we got home, this is my parents' semi-detached house, I asked, because I thought it was polite to do so, I said, oh, do you want to come in for a cup of tea? And they said, yeah, all right. I thought, what the? So I had my favourite band in the living room, and my parents asleep upstairs. And the thing about this story is that years later, I started working with an amazing American singer-songwriter called Peter Blegvad, who I think is a genius. And he asked me to be in a band with him. So I went to New York. It was a New York-based thing, and the bass player was a guy called John Greaves, who was in Henry Cow and was in my living room that evening. And I'd worked with him. I played on various albums up until that point. And we were staying at Pete's loft apartment in New York and traveling to this studio up by Central Park. And then the last session we did, we came back and there was drinks, and I think they must have ordered an Indian takeaway. Because at that point, I chose to say to John, I said, John, when you were touring back in the 70s, do you remember this young kid coming to, and because the band would wave at him, and he went, oh yeah, I do, yeah, why, do you know him? I said, it's me, John. He went, what the fuck? And he couldn't believe it was me. But the end of this story is some years later. This is about 2013 or whatever. They reformed to play a commemorative gig because one of the members died. And in the interim, I'd got this weird one. Sorry, this is such a long rambling story, but I'll try to get to the end.
Do you know what? They're prog fans. They're really used to this kind of
Even
thing.
the anecdotes are long and complicated, yeah. So one evening I'm sat at home, my ex-wife has gone out, and I'm looking after the kids, supposedly, and having a glass of wine, and my phone pinged. And it was a message saying, you've got a new follower on Twitter. And I was rather shocked, because it was a young, blonde, attractive woman, and I certainly don't get that kind of attention. I was surprised by that. And then there was another ping, and it was a message from her. And she said, you won't know me, but I think you'll know my husband, Jim, better known to the public as Vic Reeves. And she said, Jim's a big fan of yours. We've got your last album. And he doesn't do any social media, so I told him you were on there. And I thought, bloody hell, how weird is that? And then we both ended the thing because Hebden was on, which he was in, and I was about to watch it. And then at the end of it, she wrote again and said, Jim fancies a chat. Do you mind if he calls you? And I said, no. So I had this long chat with Vic Reeves, who turns out is a huge Henry Cow fan as well. So when they announced that this memorial gig was going to be on at the Barbican, I bought 2 tickets, and the first person I thought of to go to was him, so I phoned him up. So me and Jim are in the front row, and there they are, playing this music again. And during the interval, just as they were leaving the stage, John Greaves kind of catches my eye and says, have you got a backstage pass? I said, yeah. He said, I'll see you afterwards. Right? And so the gig ends, and me and Jim go backstage, and there's John Greaves, and he said, this is the first time I've played this music with these people in 30-odd years. And he said, and you're still in the audience and I'm still waving at you. So.
Beautiful. One of my favourite Vic Reeves stories, when he was growing up, people used to have leather jackets with their favourite band on the back, and he used to have in studs various artists which I think is just such a... I'll tell you what, let's do another one that, again, I'm just thinking of those things that help us through childhood, you know, and for you, music, and for me as well. But also another thing for me, that I wrote this poem about, I loved horror movies when I was a kid. I loved Universal horror movies in particular. And I wrote to Boris Karloff's widow, because I went into a phone box. In the old days, you used to be able to go in the phone box and there were all the phone directories there. And I found a Karloff, and I thought, chances are. And I still have the letter that she sent back, 2-page letter, beautiful letter. And so this is, I don't know if you remember, this is the Happy Sofa.
All right.
Yeah, so it's the one about the
to,
horror movies.
See if I can set this up.
I'm safe here, safe behind the sofa, secure behind the stuffing. And I'm ready for Karloff shuffling and werewolves snuffling and the muffled cries of another poish bride, walled in, hung up, tied down, ready to be severed as the pendulum swings. You see, here, my dear, my fear has an off button. So I can be cosy with Lugosi. I can commit to Ingrid Pitt. I can feel the chill with Lionel Atwill. I can shout, "It's alive!" with Colin Clive. I can feel sorry for Peter Lorre. I can eat a fly with Dwight Fry. I can hide the bloodstains of Claude Rains as they redden the snow. And I'll be a creeper with Rondo. I'll fight a ravenous eel for Barbara Steele. I'll visit a morgue in Manchester for the hand of Elsa Lanchester. I'll scream like a coffin-encased banshee for just one word from Christopher Lee. And I ain't messing you when I tell you I'll embroider with Ernest Thesiger. But then, the truly terrifying, the screen turns black. The end of the monster's ball, and I'm back to the playground of school, where the bullies rule, and the off button is always on. And I wish I was gone. I wish I was gone to the place where I am free, hiding happily behind the city. Thank you. So on childhood, really, this is, you know, this book is, as you know, I told you, I warned you, I said, don't write a book as long as a biography of Stalin, and I think you got close.
I did get close.
But you cover so much in that book, and in particular thinking of your childhood, because like you were telling me this afternoon, you know, in your house, your mother spoke French, your dad was speaking German a lot of time. You had this incredible kind of, you know, this hybrid, and also this is the book where you really dealt with understanding your adoption and also understanding, you know, the story of your birth parents as well.
Yeah. Would it help if I read the opening?
Yeah, why not? That would be nice.
Pass me a copy of my book. I think I didn't come prepared, and so this isn't too long. Great.
That noise, is that you?
That's fireworks.
Oh, it's fireworks, right. Just because after saying Poish Bride, the fact there's now a hint of the Telltale Heart, I found kind of intriguing.
Right, so I'll just read the prologue. It's not too long. I apologise in advance. It's about 5:30 a.m. and everyone is still asleep. A restless night struggling with jet lag and a huge sense of perspective has found me wandering from my sister's wood-clad single-storey house by the woods and then slowly up towards the main road of this small and dusty town. The streets are still and empty and quiet, the air already thick and warm in anticipation of another blisteringly hot day in Arkansas. Last night we'd visited a nearby restaurant where I sampled the local delights of deep-fried catfish and hush puppies for the first and last time. From the age of 5, I'd often imagined a scenario like this. As an only child brought up in a strict and austere household where I frequently ate alone, the fantasy of a meal with my family seemed like heaven and an escape from the solitude. A simple enough dream, though doubtless exaggerated in my mind by every Christmas movie I'd ever seen. Yet here I was, finally, sat at a large round table with my sister, 3 half-brothers, my mother, and her husband, a genial, gravel-voiced, self-declared redneck who generously welcomed me into the fold. Indeed, earlier that day, he'd insisted on driving me around his small town, pointing out the places of interest. The church, the library, the bars, and then there were the cemeteries. One for whites and one for blacks, segregated even in death. And the rubbish tips, one for white rubbish and one for black. During our meal, I found myself sat next to my eldest brother. He'd not long left the Marines. I struggled to find some common ground with which to start a conversation. I racked my brain to see if I could remember some detail or other that my mother had mentioned about him during one of our phone calls. Eventually, one snippet surfaced out of my cloudy memory. So, Mum tells me you're going out with a mud wrestler. This opening gambit was greeted with a look of some indignance. She ain't no mud wrestler. Oh dear, I apologise for my mistake, feeling rather foolish and confused as to how I could have got this so wrong. She wrestles in oil. Completely different, obviously. After the meal, we gathered at my sister's home where she made a pot of tea, something she'd learned to do authentically from our Irish mother. I was impressed, and I asked if she had any biscuits to make the illusion complete. At this point, my eldest brother said, "What do you want biscuits for, boy? You have biscuits with your supper." I explained that what we call biscuits, they call cookies. And this inspired a light-hearted, good-natured conversation about the differences in our common language. What you call pants, we call trousers. What you call sidewalks, we call pavements. That sort of thing. Amid the laughter and general bonhomie, one of my brothers said, "What do y'all call out in England?" I was stunned, as much by how no one thought this comment was anachronistic, unacceptable, and out of place as I was by the word itself, and the fact that one of my newly discovered family members had used it at all, let alone so casually. "It depends on what their name is," I replied. 9 hours later, I continued my walk into the early morning sunshine towards the lumber mill on the other side of the railroad track. There wasn't a soul around, so I walked onto the rails. I stood there, staring down the long, straight track, the horizon disappearing into the distance in both directions, and then it hit me. The stark reality that lay beneath the layers of loss and abandonment suddenly became clear. Had I not been adopted, had my mother kept me, like she'd kept my sister, then this is the town where I would have been brought up. This is the place that would have shaped me, my thoughts, my goals, and my dreams. I would have spoken with the same southern drawl as my brothers, and I would have called my trousers pants and referred to pavements as sidewalks, and the feeling I was left with was deeply unsettling on the most fundamental of levels. How much of who we are is innately us? How much of who I think I am would have been left? 36 years later, I find myself on the sunset stage at the Parque Olimpico in Rio de Janeiro, staring out at a huge crowd estimated at around 120,000 people. I'm standing next to my childhood hero, only now I'm his fellow bandmate. It's not just any band, but my favourite band as a teenager, King Crimson, the band that blew the top of my head apart when I first saw them aged 13, the very event that compelled me to become a musician in the first place. These two seemingly random moments and scenarios in time combine to pose a simple question. Who the fuck am I, and how the hell did I get here? Apologies for the language there.
The cross is wilting. I thought, because in the book you also write about a time where you got involved in terms of in the football world, where I think you was it Watford versus Millwall? And you were so appalled by the racism that you saw, and that kind of became, a big back and forth that you had, actually with the club itself, not just on the day. And so that moment where you are, and that's what I think is so compelling about the book, is you get a sense that you haven't sat down starting to write this book knowing who you are, that in the process of writing this book, you are still finding out how you have become who you've become.
Yeah. And I guess it's kind of swimming through all those moments. And it's that constant, it's the thing that I talk about there. It's, is it nature, is it nurture, is it a combination of the two? And if you'd have been brought up somewhere else, would you be thinking different things? And the fact that my parents were foreigners. We lived in a little rural place, in the 70s. I don't think there was one black kid at our school. So there was no integration, and yet there was that 70s kind of, there was an element of kind of racism that was acceptable, in comedy and stuff. And I got a lot of grief because I had curly hair and foreign parents, so...
And what about, because you work a lot with, and have worked a lot with Lenny Henry, so you must have had those kind of conversations. Lenny's new book, which he's been getting,
a lot of grief.
Very unjustified, I think, flack for. But this must be, again, that sense of belonging, because I certainly see that with Lenny's work, I think, as well, when he's at his most autobiographical.
Yeah. Well, he had a similar thing. The guy he thought was his father, what turned out wasn't his dad at all, so... And I think it does instill, I started doing kind of post-adoptive therapy after I'd written the book, because it's one thing to experience it and kind of think about it, but when you kind of put it all down in one lump and examine this thing, and it's all so complicated because my mother, my real mother was Irish and a singer in a big Irish show band, and she ended up living in Bearden, Arkansas, and she wouldn't tell me who my father was, and there's loads of secrets and lies, and I ended up there was other siblings that she refused to even admit existed, and then the end of the book is actually me finding my father for the first time. That's still only about 4 or 5 years ago.
I think that's such an amazing thing, and I'm sure for some of the people here as well, which is how many people I know of so many different ages who are still working, the childhood, those things that people, when I've been talking about the Normally Weird book, in that book I write a little bit about the fact that I was in a car crash when I was 3 years old, and my mum was very nearly killed and would have died if my dad hadn't said to the ambulance people, you cannot take her to the local hospital, she'll die. And I still realise now at 56 years old that, like, when I wrote a book a while ago called I'm a Joke and So Are You, in that I thought one of the main elements of why I became who I became was I thought I'd caused the crash. Because when you're little, you think you have a power to cause chaos. And I still think that was a major thing.
It stays with you, that's the thing. You don't leave your childhood behind, you drag it along with you.
Yeah.
And even though you can look at that now rationally and know that of course it's got nothing to do with you, you still feel that sense of it, and that's quite a big thing to suddenly accept all these years later, that all those feelings that I had, and they're abandonment issues, they're kind of, and I was adopted by although we reconciled when he was much older, but my father, he didn't really want, I was always referred to as my mother's child rather than him. So it was like this double whammy of rejection. You're being rejected by the people who've adopted you as well.
I think that's one of the things that I think. In fact, do you mind if I read a little poem just about?
No, of course.
This is someone who, in fact, I'm going to see next week, who's an actor called Colin Jevons, and you'd know him as Lestrade in Jeremy Brett's Sherlock Holmes or Blue Remembered Hills. And I'd never realised that, because I love those kind of character actors. You'll see him pop them up in a lot of stuff. And I was friends with a guy called Barney Jevons. I've been friends with him for 25 years. And then one day I saw him walking up the hill ahead of me, and I thought he's shaped a bit like the actor Colin Jevons. And then I thought his name's Jevons. And I stopped him. I said, Barney, I've just realised that from a distance you're shaped like the actor Colin Jevons, and your name is Jevons. Are you related? He went, yeah, he's my dad. I said, why did you never tell me that? Because you didn't ask. And then, and I said to him, I've not seen your dad in anything for years. And he said no, he retired because a psychic medium told him that he was going to die in his early 60s. So we decided to, he retired to spend time with our mum. But anyway, I'm going to see Colin next week, and it's just after his 96th birthday. But one of the first stories he told me was that when he was 8, he wrote a story at school, and the next day the teacher brought him to the front of the class in front of everyone and said, "Colin Jevons, there is no way you could have written this story. You must have copied it out from a book." Of course, he had written the story. But he said to me, from that point onwards, I always realised you have to be very careful with your imagination because it gets you into trouble. And I thought that was 87 years ago. But it is, and you can look back now, as you said, with an adult mind and go, don't be so silly, but it doesn't matter. You didn't have an adult mind when that happened. No. And this is something that I want to say, I think you would probably agree with me, which is, in terms of many people carry trauma with them. And many people look at their trauma and go, oh, it's not really good enough trauma. There's much, people but there's no measurement of trauma. There's not a blood test that says this is enough trauma and that's not enough trauma. And I think one of the most important things is people get worried that they're bringing everyone down, or it's heavy, or they get worried that, that, as I said, their trauma's not good enough, or that it's selfish, and it's not. Certainly from my own experience, I've realised that the more you're able to deal with your trauma, the stronger that you become. And as you become stronger, you become a fantastic ally to other people. So it, in fact, really works. So this is just a poem that I wrote, not just for Colin. It was also for some of the other friends of mine who are still carrying some of the difficulties they had in their childhood. At 95, I can still see in his eyes the teacher that shamed him, the one that wouldn't believe his creativity had not been stolen from a book. His lesson learnt, he never dared allow his imagination to run wild. Only a child, and already others built the wall to keep him in. The bully evades their insecurity by surrounding themselves with those weak need, explodes with goading at those more other than the rest. The ruthless jesting, dragging, dunking, undermining, travels from the school gates, still gnaws the flesh inside the retirement home. The keenness of the meanness of the French teacher runs through him like hate through a stick of rock. The boys that found their joys by stripping a barely teen down to his skin and dripping hot wax upon him. The girls who made a world that wouldn't let you in, so you stood alone each break time, waiting for the possibility of a friend, which was always ended by a rumour or a lie. Time passes, but we carry it with us. And we should feel no shame. Let our stories rise to the surface. Let them breathe the air. Let us start to heal. And I wanted to ask you about these moments when you were writing the book, because I know there's a few things that we've talked about in the past where I can see the emotion rise up in you, and I can see some of the stuff you've been carrying and you didn't know you actually had it on your back. What for you, when you were writing this book, were those really key moments where you thought, oh my God, I've found a new lens and I realise what this is?
I think it's what I said earlier about suddenly seeing it in a kind of chronological order, as apart from just, moments that you experience and then you try and push it away. And also, the year before I wrote the book, I got this dossier. So suddenly, there were facts, written down facts that I had no knowledge of. My mother had, my adopted mother, my real mother had thrown so many kind of red herrings out that it was difficult to comprehend. So that was really quite alarming. It's a small document, but I found out, for instance, that she'd built a narrative. For instance, she'd said that she'd met my father, they'd fallen in love, she got pregnant with me, she then got pregnant with Debbie, my sister, and then for some undisclosed reason he had to go back to America, at which point she found out that he was a bigamist and that she'd married him bigamously, and within a month or so of the predicted birth of my sister, she decided, I can't look after two, so I'll have him adopted. So that was her narrative. And then you read in cold black and white that actually I was with her for 5 weeks. And then I lived the first year of my life with foster parents in Bennett's End. That's enough to fuck anybody up, I should imagine. And
Cross is wilting again.
yeah, and of course, you know, she wasn't married to anybody, bigamously or not. And for the first time, I saw written down my father's name because it's not on any of the other documentation. So that was, you know, it all kind of solidified, and then you start piecing all the bits together when you go back, you know, including why she was telling all these lies. Because the other thing that happened around the same time, this is just before I started writing the book. We were playing in Santiago in Chile, and I was in the hotel and waiting for the bus to arrive to do the sound check, and my phone pinged. And about 19 years prior to that, my sister had written to me. My sister was born in England, but grew up in America. And she'd written to me saying, "Can you get me a copy of my birth certificate?" Because Mum says she hasn't got one or can't find it. So I went to the records office, which at the time was in Clerkenwell, I think. And it's pre-digitization, so you had to go into a library with these big leather-bound tomes and flick through it. So I knew the district and the address and, of course, the birth date of my sister. So I found her entry, and then you write the number down and you order a qualified, certified birth certificate. And for some reason, and I still can't remember whether it was just gut instinct or something my sister said, but I kept looking. And a year and 3 months later, I found the birth of another sibling at the same address, born to my mother. So I ordered his birth certificate too, and it said adopted at birth. 19 years later, my phone pings in a hotel room in Santiago in Chile, and it's this guy saying, "My name's Darren. I think you're my brother." I'd already told, when I first saw the birth certificate, I told my sister, "I've got your birth certificate, but I've discovered another child." And I said, "Do not tell Mum," because I know, you know, I'd experienced enough of her drama to know that it would be denied or whatever. And then my sister had a huge row with her on one of the big trips that they have to do out there, because, you know, the local hospital's 3 hours away, etc. And as a piece of kind of ammunition, she threw the hand grenade in because of the row they were having. So, "Oh, Jakko knows about Darren." And my mum, I never spoke to my mum again. She wrote me this really nasty letter, accusing me of trying to spread these terrible lies, abusing the nature of her reputation, and yeah, I never spoke to her again. That was the last contact as a result of that. So yeah, it's putting all that stuff together.
How much do you think? Because we talked about this when we were in your studio one day, and I love watching you just come up with tunes, just come up with kind of soundbed, and it made me think how important the ability to turn to the guitar is, in the same way that I find writing and performing is vital to me.
Yeah,
you know? And that bit now of just going, thank heavens I can now just create, so even if it's just for yourself, it doesn't have to be for a public.
I mean, it is a cliche, but yeah, I'm sure that's what drives it. And as you know, I'm very fond of that Neil Innes line. Before he sang a song, he said, "I've suffered for my art, now it's your turn." So that's what it feels like too.
See, one of my favourites of his is, before you try and become rich and famous, you should find out who you are. Because you might find out you're someone who doesn't want to be rich and famous. And I think that is, and I certainly feel like that, like when I found out about the way that my mind worked and kind of was able to change things through a mixture of, kind of medication and diagnosis, I realised that someone said to me, what do you think you never achieved, because of the way your self-loathing and anxiety and all that. I said, well, the good thing is, I could have been, I think, more successful. I could have said yes to some things that, but it turns out I don't really want to be more successful, and being rich wouldn't suit me at all. So I'm very happy in these budget cardigans, and
they suit you, Robin.
They do, don't they? There's a certain, but it's so that bit of the journey doesn't end. The journey of finding out what's going on. What about in terms of the sense of your relationship with, I'm going to call you your parents, those who brought you. How has that changed in writing this book? Because obviously the title of the book, I don't know if you want to tell that story.
Well, again, if people can bear with it, I could. Yeah, the title of the book. I'll set the scene. My adoptive mother developed Alzheimer's, and in the end, she was a danger to herself, really. So we moved her into a care home in Aberslangly up the road here. And we had a particularly difficult Christmas where I took my father there, and it was really unpleasant because he couldn't understand that, he couldn't get his head around the disease. It made no sense to him, so he took it personally that she was her attention was drifting off. Anyway, when we left that day, the house manager said, "Look, your mum's got to a stage now where she doesn't really know. Time is an elastic concept, so don't give yourself a hard time. Why don't you just leave it a week?" She said, we're taking them on a trip to London to see the lights. Why don't you come in at the beginning of January? So that's a setup for this. And so in the light of the manager's suggestion, I went to see Mum on January the 6th of the new year, 1998. I greeted her look of surprise with, "It's me, your son," which seemed to relax and assure her for a moment. It's hard to explain the nature of the conversation that followed, but let me try. Imagine that our minds contain a lifetime of memory, and those memories are all roughly stored in chronological order in folders of a filing cabinet in our heads. And then one day the folders disintegrate and all the memories begin to free associate with each other, no longer bound by time or context, just all coexisting and intertwined in one moment. Well, that's how the conversation progressed that morning. One minute, Camille is talking to her grown-up son in his 30s, and the next, it's the 5-year-old version of him, but with no separation, sometimes within a single sentence even. Indeed, she began discussing things from my childhood that I'd forgotten or more likely buried, as if they were happening right there and then. And she referenced one thing in particular. In the aftermath of Dad's severe punishment beatings when I was a child, Mum would come to me, leaving sufficient time not to appear disunited in parental agreement, of course. And she would comfort me and express regret, even guilt for what had happened. And here on a January morning, some 35 years later, she repeated what she'd said all those years ago, that I was not to worry, that we would leave him, that we'd get a place together, just me and her, and that he wouldn't be able to hurt me again. She appeared to know that she was in some place of recovery, hoping to get better, but wanted to be true to her promise when that moment came. So she kept repeating the phrase, "when we go home." It was seriously upsetting. To clearly see how the disease was robbing her of time and place, and to uncover the childhood memories that I'd so successfully laid to rest. At some point, I asked her about her trip to London, looking for a subject that was less contentious or upsetting. Those Christmas lights in the West End, how was that? But she looked bemused. There was no trip. She hadn't seen any lights. What was I talking about? As I was leaving the home, the manager called me into her office and asked me to sit down. She told me that she couldn't help but overhear me ask my mum about the trip to London. And she wanted me to know that, yes, they did have the trip to London, and that, yes, Mum went. And she had a lovely time. But she wanted me to understand where we were now. That Mum lives purely in the here and now. That all they can do is manage the moments, make sure she has a nice time as possible, even though she won't remember any of it. That she really has no past or future anymore, just the moment she's in. That's quite a concept to get your head around. At that very moment, Mum wandered into the office, seemingly lost. I turned around and looked at her, and she looked back at me. A staff member followed her in and said, "No, Mrs. Jakszyk, your room's this way, darling." Mum looked up at her, smiling, and then back at me again. She clearly had no idea who I was. As they slowly left the room, she turned to the carer and she said, "Who's the boy with the lovely hair?" It was the last thing I would ever hear her say. She died in her sleep in the early hours of the following morning. That's cheered everyone up, isn't it?
But it is, I mean, what a beautiful final thing to hear. And I wondered about, there's a relative of mine who, as his dementia, he was brought up in Holland during the Second World War and saw terrible, terrible things. And it was as his dementia developed that his children started to realise that he had PTSD and that he had this incredible, he'd built all of these protective devices, and then they started to fall away and they saw the person who lay behind it. And I wondered how, whether those, I mean, to me, it's incredibly touching that obviously your mother in those days, she really did want to take you away.
Yeah.
And she might not have said it to you, and you're now seeing the truth that lay within her in terms of her intentions and what she wanted for you.
Yeah, it's another element of, I don't know if it's all dementia, but certainly what she was experiencing was a certain filter disappears, So she started telling things that she would normally not, and so I've learned some stuff about her, which is also in the book, about, her life. She was abandoned as a child herself, and eventually at the age of 12 had to go and live in Paris with a woman she'd never met, her real mother. And she started telling me about her stepfather and potential abuse, and so that's another layer that becomes kind of unravelled as a result of all that.
That's why I can't stand all of those kind of like Piers Morgan types who are always making these pronouncements about, young people nowadays, they can't handle anything, can they? And I think, do you not know anything about the other generations, the previous generations? I think about, whenever I hear things about mental health, and I think, well, my mum suffered from, after that crash, depression for the rest of her life. Her closest friend we never knew, but she had bipolar, and that, the uncle that I've mentioned, there's so many people.
It's all hidden and suppressed,
And that's, I'll just do, Ben, when do we need to go to questions, by the way? Are we...
half an hour ago, I think.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just do... This is a quick... my mum had dementia as well, and there's a wonderful... Some of you might know Wendy Mitchell, who wrote these brilliant books. She was aware that she had dementia, and the first book was called Somebody I Used to Know, and she wrote about the fact that she couldn't read thrillers anymore, so she started to read poetry, because thrillers she couldn't remember where the character... And it's this... And her books are... She died, I think, last year, and they're really wonderful books. And it made me think about the fact that for my mum, during all these times of terrible sadness and difficulties, she absolutely loved Rising Damp. And that was the thing that we watched over and over again. And I still think Rising Damp is better than Fawlty Towers, by the way. I'd like to make that clear now. I know it's probably the edgiest thing you'll ever hear on stage, that. Don't tell Cleese, he'll be furious. Well, he is anyway, so it doesn't matter. Anyway, so this is this little poem called Rigsby. Rising Damp still does it. She laughs like a drain. Same old episodes over and over again. Not enough recall for detectives now, no Midsummer or Morse, but Roster's Rigsby brings her close to asthma. Some days I fear she'll die, but oh, so happily, in front of Beckinsale. So much now slips her mind. Her lifelong ailments, nearly gone, forgotten, embedded in this thinning mind. Bursts of consciousness still stiffen her, knees disappoint, resolve resigns, and everything's so hard to find. And then another darkness falls. Like a child, emotions are binary, silence or despair, until we press play again, and Roster's Rigsby is there.
Should we do some questions?
Let's do that. Who would like to ask any questions? And feel free, and I know people are sometimes a bit nervous, but, right, one back there, wonderful.
I'm afraid I'm not very good at these sort of meetings, but we met several years ago in Tesco's.
I remember it vividly.
You remember? Yeah. And then
Can you remember what was in my bag? No.
Yeah. And then we kept in touch to a degree afterwards. Read the book, amazing, absolutely fascinating, but it brought up some bad memories of my past as well. We were at school at the same time in Watford. I'm 68 now, you're 67. We played football against each other.
Did we?
Victoria Boys School.
Yeah, I
where
know.
we had the Watford boys. We had to train. For
That's where I miserably failed my trial.
Yeah, that's it. You get 10 minutes on, and that's it.
But thanks for bringing that up again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, luckily I got through.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm really pleased.
Yeah,
for
I know.
you.
I bet you. Anyway, we boarded at the Royal Caledonian School in Aldenham Road, but we went to school during the day at Victoria. And that was 1964, and it was horrendous. Reading your book, it dragged it all. You saying about the past and your childhood coming all sudden forward. It all happened with me as well. Read right the way through the book. I was in tears at the end because things that happened when you're 7 years old, and all of a sudden it comes through by reading that book, because it hit me so much that it was so real to my situation that my parents didn't want to know, shoved it at boarding school, you know,
Yeah.
off you go, we don't want to know, 64, they were getting divorced. That doesn't happen in the 60s. You bear it up and that's it, you know, being my father being Scottish, you grin and bear it, whatever. But it hung with me throughout my whole life. And I spoke to my stepmother. I hadn't spoken to her for 20 years, whatever. We somehow got into, I'm not on Facebook or anything like any of that crap. I'm not interested. But somehow she got in contact with me. She came down, we had a coffee. I still live in Tring. And she was saying about, oh, you have to go. I said, look, there's so many things that have upset me in the past that I need to deal with now. And they still don't want to know. You know, it's one of the, but it was dragged up from the past, and it was for weeks after, if not months. I'm walking around in a daze because of that book, because it brought it.
I can only apologise, but I'm not sure you'll have a legal claim if you do try and sue me.
But it was for the good reason. It came out, and it's done now, so it's finished. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Who else? Oh, we're going to do it in order now. The next row along. Yeah.
Way down the front. Yes, thank you. I first saw the two of you at Latitude and thoroughly enjoyed it. So you've obviously been working together for a while. I suppose my question is, what have you learned from each other from working together? And has working together changed or influenced what you've created, what you've done since?
I mean, I think we both like playing. I think, as in, you know, I mean, we met years ago, and then more recently we've hung out a lot more.
Yeah.
And then I just said to Jakko, when I started writing poetry, because it was only really a little bit over a year ago that I really started writing a lot. And I like when we did that thing at Latitude, what was fun about that was, and that also with my friend Rachel as well, and both of the musicians were going, what do we do though? I mean, and I said, well, it doesn't matter. Because it was like the other day where when I just made you do, I said, oh, actually, you've never heard this poem before, but just make some and we'll see what happens. And I said, that's the great thing about not rehearsing, is you can't do it wrongly, because there was never a right way of doing it.
No.
And I think you have some of that. I know that on the other side of it, of course, when you're in King Crimson, I'm told that Robert doesn't like you suddenly bringing out a kazoo and just blasting that. He's reasonably...
We rehearse for months, you know, and... there's a repertoire of 5 hours of very complicated music. So, yeah, this is a complete anathema to that. So, in fact, you know, we quite often rehearse and come up with stuff, and then we get on stage and you decide we're not doing that. And so it was all a waste of time anyway. So...
But we had a lovely time, didn't
we? Had a lovely time.
And I did bring you a nice shoe pastry today as
you
well,
did.
didn't I?
I was
all
very,
went
very,
well.
very grateful. And
yeah, so I'm trying to bring... It's a bit... Oh, no, I won't tell the story anyway. Yeah.
You both talk with such psychological mindedness, generational visitations, developmental trauma in a child. I'm curious where that has come from in both of you.
I think it's... I don't know, you spend the first half of your life just experiencing this stuff, and the second half of it trying to work out, well, why... You know, why does that word trigger me, or why does that image trigger me? And it is that thing of, you know, you're an adult and you know those things. They don't have any logic to them, but they're imprinted in you at such an early age. I went one of the because I'm a bit of a skeptic, you know, about most things. So that was difficult when I started going to counselling, you know, because I thought, well, yeah, I'm a baby. How on earth do I know? And this counsellor said to me, he said, look, he said, if there was a baby here now and I lit a cigarette and I put that cigarette on the baby's arm, it would scream in pain. It doesn't understand the concept of pain. It knows it hurts, though, and it knows that it will be scared of that for it. And so, yeah, it's the realisation of that. I lived for years. I had a thing where... As an example, I remember a friend of mine and I, we were going to a gig, and in the car he said, oh, I've invited my mate Ollie, who I don't know, and he's coming too, is that all right? Yeah, of course. And then we go to pick him up, and we go to this house. It's a house I've never been into, a bloke I've never met, and there's clearly some shit going on, and there's a kind of horrible vibe between him and his wife or partner. And I feel guilty. I feel responsible. It's mad, you know. I'm a grown-up. I don't know these people, But that feeling is so real and so overwhelming, you know. And it's taken me ages to rid myself of that sense of blame, that sense of responsibility, you know.
That's something I think I share with you on that, because again, I think probably because of the car crash, because I thought it was my fault, I've always been tremendously worried about damaging other people. And, you know, and sometimes when you've got I mean, I think in one of my books, I'm sorry, you know, if I read about a murder that happened in Minneapolis, for a moment I think, I hope it wasn't me.
Yeah.
I think, well, you were in Rickmansworth. What are you talking about? But it's, and I think, and again, I think there's a distance of time, but I think I was very lucky. One of the things that happened with me was I started doing more stuff on stage, which I found people would come up to me afterwards and they'd either open up or they'd say they'd found something helpful. But I would never, for instance, going to get a diagnosis or whatever, I never did that. It was an autistic stranger who got in contact with me and said, I'd really like to have a word because I've been following the pattern. And then one friend of mine, who's both her kids are ADHD, or autism and ADHD, she still says, she said, I feel really guilty because I just didn't know that you didn't know, because it was so overt in the way that she was able to see, you know, as so many people do, the hiding of the pain. And again, it's the guilt, which is we want to make everyone else happier, but we don't factor in making ourselves happier because that feels self-indulgent. And again, going back to what I was saying before about trauma, that realization that rather than being self-indulgent, it does make, it improves not just your world, but it improves the possibilities that you have with other people. I love when people will sometimes get in contact with me, and like one of my friends recently sent me an email about some really terrible things that happened in one of her relationships, and she started it by saying, I'm sorry to send you this heavy email. And I said, honestly, it's not heavy. Let's not call it heavy. Let's not, because you're not giving me a burden. You're giving us an opportunity to, and a moment of honesty, which can feel like such an incredible thing for someone to do. And I think we need to do that far more often, is to not just think, oh, I don't want to drag everyone down, to actually go, the conversations are more interesting as well. When you're actually able to sit and know that no one's going to take the piss, that no one's going to, you know, that's something that I'm not keen on banter culture at all. I always think that bit where everything has to be turned into a joke. And of course, I've been part of that. You know, in the comedy world, there's a lot of that. But then you get these people like Hannah Gadsby doing Nanette and my friend Josie Long and all that, you know, and there's this incredible honesty, stuff that's very, very funny. But at the end of it, you go, oh, I feel better about being alive. Anyone else like to ask anything?
Something a bit cheerier.
Yeah, we've not done the cheery stuff,
No,
have
no,
we?
no.
No, but
I'll try and be a bit cheerier.
Okay.
Part of my sort of work before this evening was to listen to Radical Action and the audio diary selection.
Oh, yeah.
Before I ask the question that comes out of that, I'd just like to say thank you for Son of Glenn, because I think some of the guitar playing is exceptional.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
But when I listened to that period of King Crimson that you were so much a part of, what 3 tracks of all of those complicated pieces of music did you prefer to play above all the others?
Well, that's... I mean, you know, playing some of that stuff was incredibly challenging and unbelievably daunting. I remember sitting in my studio up the road with Robert Fripp before we'd rehearsed a note, just talking about what the repertoire might consist of. And it's slightly technical, but Robert changed the way he tunes his guitar in the 80s. And so when he started talking about doing these things like Lark's Tongues and Aspic Part 1, so as a fanboy, I'm thinking, oh man, that's fantastic. I haven't played that live in about 40 years. But then he said, that's very difficult for me to play in the new tuning, so you can play that. And I thought, I can't fucking play that. Are you insane? Because it's a very complicated thing. So some of those things are, you know, there's an immense sense of achievement and the joy of, you know, this music that you loved, suddenly you're part of it. But in terms of, I mean, I loved singing Islands, which is this beautiful ballad. And when David Bowie died, I did think, should we do Heroes? Because Robert Fripp, the guitarist in King Crimson, famously plays the iconic lead guitar stuff all throughout. And then I thought, oh no, I'm not going to sit. He'll think that's a naff suggestion. And then literally the next day he phoned me up and said, I think we might do Heroes as a understated tribute to David. And so that was an absolute blast, you know, because especially the first few shows where people weren't expecting it. And of course, you know, musically it's infinitely more simplistic than everything else I had to play. So it was the only moment in the evening where I felt like a rock star. So I enjoyed playing that. I don't know. Yeah, it's you know, and sometimes it's to do with place. We did Epitaph in Hiroshima, and the venue is literally a 2-minute walk from the Peace Park, which is where the main explosion was. That was an extraordinary thing. So it's for me, it's all mixed up with actually the event itself. We played 2 nights at the ancient amphitheatre in Pompeii, which was an extraordinary thing to have done. That was, you know, so it kind of goes beyond the actual songs themselves, I think.
What I found fascinating when I saw you was that there really is no sense of time. That once it starts, and I wasn't like a huge fan. I like the music, but I'm not, you know, some people there, they know every single note from every single recording. And I just remember looking at my watch at the interval and going, how can it be that we've been here for an hour and 45 minutes? And I love that bit in the King Crimson documentary where Robert starts to talk about the importance of that every gig he hopes for at least some people, it will be a transcendent experience. And I think that's how all art should be, which is you go, whether it's comedy, whether it's, you know, kind of poetry, whether it's music, that bit that you really want people to, and the fact that he still has that so clearly, and that when I see all of you together, you know, it's a beautiful thing, because, you know, there's a lot of lazy, sloppy stuff which ends up kind of, you know, power on TV and, you know, Jimmy Carrs of the world, and then you see things like that. Shall we end on that one that we practiced? Just thinking, because we did a lot about tears and things like that and emotion. There's a poem with the title "Crying Porn," which is not as threatening as it sounds. And it was my friend Josie Long taught it to me. She said it means those things that when you've not been able to cry at reality. Perhaps you've been at a funeral, perhaps you've been in the hospital, but you haven't. You thought, I didn't cry, and I really wanted to, but all these social barriers or whatever. And so you watch something that moves you every time. You know, so for me, things like The Elephant Man, which I don't know how many times I've watched it, but it is probably triple, you know, now it's just, you know, 100 times. I just think it's an amazing piece of work. And so I wrote this little poem, which is about when you can't express yourself outwardly, but you then are able to turn, and sometimes, of course, it's music as well.
Okay, well, I'll try and remember what we came up with. Okay.
I cannot cry in front of you. I mustn't cry in a crowded room. I didn't cry in the pulpit as I sent my father to the tomb. I'm not cold, but I need control. Tears, be obedient, please. Stay behind my eyes. Occasionally, alone, I can drink until the whiskey runs down my face. But it's the darkness of the screen. It's the excellence of the fakery of acting. The Michael Nyman soundtrack that stings. Here, I can find my honest melancholy. John Hurt doesn't deceive in his immaculately interpreted sadness. Hopkins and Gielgud and Monochrome and Freddie Jones. Yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I fear no evil. Mr. Cargon? Yes, what is it? What's that? I didn't teach him that part. How do you know the rest of it, John? The 23rd Psalm. I used to read the Bible every day. The 23rd Psalm's beautiful. It's my favourite. With that, I'm lost in all the sadness and the hope and the love within the world. In the glistering eyes of June, in a sky without a moon, erased by flames, we see a destiny. A cockpit burns, and Peter thinks, now it's my turn. For at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near, and yonder before us lie deserts of vast eternity. And in marvel, what a marvel. Letter from my mother. What I want her to know is that I love her very much, that I've never shown it really, but I loved her right up to the end. I love you, June, because you're life and I'm leaving you. It's Christmas and everyone is here, even those we thought were lost. On Christine's 12th day, flicking through the snaps. Oh look, Tony Tiger, this is amazing. You've got everything. It's like my whole life is flashing. I think I know what this is now. Jack, Mum is going. The time has come to leave her angel boy. And this story transforms me, opens the wound I concealed, lets me break down my defences. And through gulps and gulps of tears, I realise that what I tried to evade has always been near. Right away, Mr. Cryer. Thank you, Mr. Perks. The platform is empty, or so it may seem. But as the locomotive departs, a silhouette in the steam. Daddy, my daddy. How the flickering frames release me. But as the lights go up and the popcorn is swept, no one will know that I ever wept. I'm gonna. This is just again that thing that where music or books or so many different things allow people to speak. And what I think I was telling you in Rochester, I did that crying porn poem, slightly different version. And this woman came up to me and told me a story that is both heartbreaking, but at the same, she said, when we were little, we didn't know that our dad was dying, and we were sent to the cinema, and we went to see Railway Children, and when we came back, our mum told us that our dad had died. And the woman said to me, so I spent years waiting because they'd sent me to see Railway Children. I thought I'd see the silhouette in the steam. And again, you think she's carried that with her for so long. And I think that's the beauty of your book, I think, which is, as you were saying earlier on, and well done also for throwing in the fact you were much better at football than Jakko.
Yeah. It was a highlight for me, I tell you.
Just when you thought, well, I've shared a lot of my misery with this audience. It's got worse.
I just want to end on a slightly lighter note. I just wanted to, it's not in the book, but it was a thing we talked about earlier about how the fact that my parents didn't share a language other than kind of screwed up English has all sorts of kind of weird things. But in the end, my dad spoke English almost exclusively, and I remember after Mum died, and we moved him into this kind of warden-controlled flat. And I used to go around there once a week, and he'd have these little post-it notes with the names of TV programs and the times they were on. And I just wanted to share this with you because I went in once and he'd written ITV 7:30, Who Wants to Be a Mill Owner?
And now everyone's just going to think your book is a collection of one-liners and kind of like Nigel Reese's book of graffiti.
I don't think they'll think that.
No, I don't think they will. Thank you so much, Ben, for having us. Thank you for everyone who's made this possible. I know there's loads more stuff on at Tring Book Festival, isn't there? You've still got quite a few days left, and there's always wonderful authors coming along. So thanks very much. I know Jakko's going to be outside, and he will be very happy to sign books, and I'll be as happy as you, probably even happier to sign either my book or Jakko's book, if you want me to.
Or anybody's book.
Anyone's book, to be quite honest. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And a quick thank you to the tech team. This is the first time we've had music and spoken word in a single event, actually, and I think that from the feedback from the virtual audience is it went really well. So thank you, David, Carolyn. So the format is there's a little shopper on the left where you can get hold of Jakko's and Robin's most recent 2 books, including the poetry book, which we've managed to get in. And they're going to be signing in the foyer on the right-hand side. So please do partake in both shop and signing. Thank you.